Building it brick by brick. 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 Building it brick by brick.
Hi everybody, this is Jacqueline Lukman and welcome to Brick by Brick. So I have been involved in a lot of political discussions, a lot of them. And invariably, people will always get to a point in the discussion where they seem to get exasperated. And they always say things like, well, what we really need is not new laws. What we really need are for people to get back to the golden rule. Or my personal favorite, what we really need is for this country to get back to God. And the discussion ends there for them. And I think that's a very interesting perspective to take because it assumes something that I don't think many people realize isn't even true about this country, let alone the rest of the world. And it's not just regular everyday people who say this kind of stuff. All we need is the golden rule. For if everybody just followed the golden rule, then everything would be all right and we wouldn't have any of these problems. People, regular folks, aren't the only ones who say that kind of stuff. We hear it from politicians too sometimes. Although this one example is actually an example that I think is a pretty good one. Let me show you what I mean.
It goes without saying, I am far from being a perfect human being, but I am motivated by a vision which exists in all of the great religions, in Christianity and Judaism, in Islam, in Buddhism, and other religions. And that vision is so beautifully and clearly stated in Matthew 7:12. And it states, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets." That is the golden rule. Do unto others what you would have them do to you. That is the golden rule, and it is not very complicated.
Now, it's very, very interesting that Bernie Sanders, who I'm going to be really honest with you right now, I have a lot of respect for Bernie Sanders. He's one of the few politicians who I actually trust. So when he says he believes in the golden rule and he believes that we should all live by the golden rule, I actually sort of believe him. But the problem with sticking to that argument for what we should all do in order to solve all the problems we see today is that not everybody believes the same thing. Don't get me wrong. Most people believe in the golden rule. Most people know what it is. Most people have heard of it. Most people understand the concept of the golden rule. The problem is most people don't actually live by that rule. And history proves that. I think it's very ironic that Bernie Sanders made that comment, those statements about living by the golden rule and treating others as you will want to be treated at Liberty University. Arguably, one of the places in this country where one particular group of people sends their children to be sort of indoctrinated into almost how not to treat people the way they would want to be treated. And I know that's a loaded statement, but these broadcasts are going to be full of loaded statements. Loaded statements that people are going to disagree with, loaded statements that people are going to take issue with, loaded statements that I really honestly hope challenge your preconceived notions about what you think the history of this country really is. Because it's my belief that what we need in this country is not for everyone to go back to living by the golden rule. I think that's a false statement simply because there was never a period of time in this country where everyone lived by the golden rule. There was never a period of time in this country where everyone treated other people the way they wanted to be treated. When do people think that time was, I wonder? Do they think that time existed during when the doctrine of discovery made its way here to the Americas, from the papal bullas that were issued by the Catholic Church in Portugal that were given to Christopher Columbus, and was basically permission from the Catholic Church to steal and kill anyone that the discoverers came in contact with who wouldn't convert to Christianity? Was that when we lived by the golden rule? Or was it during the period of time that upstanding people who called themselves men and women of God or believers in some kind of faith owned slaves? Or was it that period of time when upstanding moral citizens who found themselves in church every Sunday treated women as second-class citizens? Or was it that period of time when we were all treating other people the way we wanted to be treated, when we were forcing children to work 12 and 13-hour days, sometimes longer? Were we treating each other the way we want to be treated when we allowed the abuse of coal miners' wives in West Virginia in rape rooms at the company stores? Were we treating each other with the kind of respect we would want to receive from other people when we were ignoring the contributions of black soldiers in the Spanish-American War, in World War I, in the Civil War, in World War II? Were we treating people with the kind of regard that we would want to be treated when we met those soldiers coming back from those wars with not just discrimination, but outright violence? How about when we were okay with government-mandated housing discrimination against black people? Were we living by the golden rule then in this country? Or when we were okay with police abuse of gay Americans under the guise of vice squads, using the police to go after people because of their sexual orientation? Were we living by the golden rule then? How about our continued acceptance of disabled Americans as not even second-class citizens, but how about not even citizens at all, to the point where we're okay with paying them much less than you or I would make, you or I, able-bodied people, to the point where most disabled people who live independently live in poverty? Are we living by the golden rule when we treat people that way? And just to make sure you understand, I'm not just bashing people of faith, because I am a person of faith. I am a Christian. I understand my faith very well. There are some aspects of my holy text that I don't get and that I don't understand and that I flat out don't agree with, but I am a person of faith. I do believe that there is a power much higher and much smarter and much more patient than myself. But I'm not just going after people of faith with our strange notion that there was some period of time in this country where we all lived by the golden rule and we all treated each other well. No, secularists kind of get caught up in that trap too. And by secularists, please understand, I'm not calling names, I'm not disparaging anyone. I'm just talking about people who generally don't subscribe to any religious faith. Because sometimes what I hear from some secularists are things like, well, listen, if we just give out goodness into the universe, then we'll get it back. Or I hear a lot about the law of reciprocity, which is sort of the same concept. You treat people the way they've treated you. It's actually the golden rule in reverse. That's very interesting. You should treat people the way they've treated you if they've been good to you. So if someone's been good to you, of course you should be good to them back. Well, the problem with that argument is obviously everyone isn't good to everyone else. So what do you do with people who aren't good to you? What do you do about them? What do you do when those people are people in positions of power who make decisions, who are on the city councils and the school boards, who are the police chiefs and the judges, who are the teachers, who are the senators, who are the presidents? And another trap that my secularist friends fall into is blaming all of the problems in this country and in the world on religion. Now, people of faith have our issues with misinterpreting our holy text. Everyone of every faith does it. We're human. We like to misinterpret things. We like to twist the meaning of things to fit what we like, how we like to see things. That's a human thing. But it's interesting when my secularist friends blame all of the ills in this country on religion, and they come to the conclusion that, well, if we banned all religion, we wouldn't have any of these problems. Well, that's not true either. Because the major wars that were fought didn't have anything to do with religion. The Korean War had nothing to do with religion. Vietnam had nothing to do with religion. World War I and World War II had nothing to do with religion. But if you just want to look at domestic issues, housing discrimination had nothing to do with religion. Police brutality against black and brown bodies has nothing to do with religion. Neither does environmental injustice and environmental racism. The privatization of public services to the point where the poor, who are the most served by those services, are almost rendered destitute. That has nothing to do with religion. So while people of faith have to be really careful that we don't fall back on the lazy thinking of, well, if everyone just lived by the golden rule, we'd all be fine. And if this country just got back to God first, we'd all be fine. Well, my secular friends have to be careful that they're not committing the same mistake in believing that there is one answer to these problems, and that answer involves an ideology. So what is the answer, Jacqueline? I know that you all are asking yourselves that right now. You're probably asking me that right now. Well, that's why we're here. Because I believe the answer to getting past these issues we face today, not just getting past them, but resolving them and building a better future for all of us, is to examine the history of how we got here. See, when people tell me that we need to get back to following the golden rule, or we need to get back as a country to putting God first, or we need to put back out into the universe what we want to receive, I can't help but think of the period of time in this country where Americans were allegedly the most religious, were allegedly the most generous, but we were legally segregated. And very frequently we talk about how good people stood by and did nothing in regard to other countries like Germany. It's the obvious example. But we don't think about ourselves. We don't think about the good people who might have been moral and upstanding people who stood by and did nothing when African descendants were enslaved and beaten and raped. Good, moral, upstanding people who stood by and did nothing when women were denied the same rights, the same pay, the same standing in society as men. Good, moral, upstanding people who did nothing while the police in major cities dragged gay and transgender Americans out of establishments that were created so that they could feel safe in a social setting. Good, moral, upstanding Americans who probably didn't have a problem living next door to a black person, or didn't have a problem moving into a neighborhood with a black family, but were silent when they realized the government intentionally refused to back mortgage loans to black couples who wanted to buy a house, and refused to back mortgage loans to white couples who wanted to buy a house in a neighborhood where a black person lived. As long as these instances of good people, good, moral, upstanding people who either believe in God or who believe that we should just be good to each other, stood by and did and said nothing much in the face of the injustices that have been visited upon several different groups of people in this country, we can never honestly say that we need to go back to a period of time where we lived by the golden rule in this country. We never have. We can never honestly say we need to go back to putting God first in this country. We honestly never have. We can never honestly say we need to just put out in the universe the energy that we want to get back, and that's what's going to happen, and it'll spread to everyone else. That has never honestly happened. In order for us to move past these feel good but really inadequate responses to the issues we face, we have got to confront the history. Because, see, history is what it is. History isn't really biased. You can not like history. You can disagree with what you find out. You can be repulsed by it. You can be disgusted by it. You can even disagree with it. I know people who say quite frequently in response to certain aspects of some of our history, oh, that doesn't matter. Oh, that's not a big deal. Why are we focusing on that? You can ignore it all you want. The history, though, is what it is, regardless of how you or I feel about it. History is unbiased. History is neither Democrat nor Republican. History is neither religious nor atheist. History is history. And it is critically, vitally important to us changing our society from this horrible morass that we are in right now to something better for all of us. George Santayana said that those who do not remember their past are condemned to repeat their mistakes. One of the major reasons we continue to deal with issues like persistent systemic racism, ageism, ableism, discrimination against the disabled, homophobia, xenophobia. One of the reasons these problems don't go away in this country, or at least one of the reasons they continue to be as persistent and as pressing as they are, is because we as a nation do not want to confront our history. We're not taught the actual history of this country in our public schools, and that is actually by design. We're taught a myth of America. We're taught the American mythos, this idea of America that we're all supposed to work our knuckles to the bone to achieve, but who the people who set this system up know that 98% of us will never grasp. It is not that America is a terrible place. It is that America's history is rife with examples of the human condition. The human condition that is present in every single society on the face of the earth. The major problem with the way we teach history in this country is that we teach it from the perspective of America as a nation being inherently good, inherently better than other countries. The people who founded this nation are inherently better than the other people who founded these other terrible, worthless nations that aren't as fabulous as ours. What a crock. It is not at all that America is a bad place. And it's not even necessarily that the founders of this country were bad people, so to speak. But it is just the fact that because they were human beings, they did some horribly unsavory things to people they deemed worthy of being abused for their benefit. That's happened everywhere. The idea that somehow that hasn't happened here in this country is a part of the American mythos. Facing that doesn't mean we're disrespecting our nation. Facing that merely means we want to stop repeating the mistakes that we don't even know we're making. Why don't we know? Because we don't know the history. So, for the rest of this series, and this is going to be a long journey, and I really hope it's a journey that you all will enjoy. It's a journey that's going to be interactive. It's not just going to be me talking. Well, most of the time it is because, I love a good chat. But every episode, I'm going to try real hard to bring to you 3 things that you can take away from these discussions. 2 of these things will probably be for you to do more research on your own. And then one of those things will more than likely be a direct action. Don't get freaked out. Please don't. Direct action doesn't mean that I'm going to send you out into the streets to protest, because I know that's not everybody's thing, and that's okay. A direct action might mean sending a question to your elected official. A direct action might mean writing a letter to your bank. But I want you to come away from these discussions with me with not just this good feeling that we've had a good chat. I want you to come away from these discussions with me feeling like you have learned something new, something you didn't know before, something that helps you understand who you are as an American, who we are as Americans, who this country, what this country is, and how this system really honestly was set up to work. I feel like I have to keep warning you because some of you have seen me in other forums, and while I'm usually pretty serious, I also have a really goofy side, and that's going to pop up here and there. But I really do have to feel like I have to keep warning you guys. When your notion of who you are is deconstructed, that can be really painful. And the one thing about Americans that I think is very true that might not be true for other people in other countries is that we identify ourselves, we have a strong affinity for the idea that we are Americans. People in other countries, at least countries in the industrialized world don't have that kind of emotional attachment to a nationalistic ideal that we do. Our identity is wrapped up in Americanness, as if Americanness is a unique thing that nobody else in the rest of the world has, that we have something much more wonderful and fabulous than everybody else in the world has. And usually when you hear that, you hear people say things like, well, we have freedom in this country. Well, there are over almost a dozen other countries in the world where there's freedom, industrialized modern countries. There's freedom all over the world. Other countries have constitutions. There are several other countries' constitutions that are very similar to ours. A couple of countries actually pattern their constitutions after ours. So America is not unique in its Americanness. That's really not a thing. But we have been conditioned to believe that we are special, unique, and divinely ordained to rule the world because we are Americans, because we were born on this landmass. And this landmass holds some magical, special, unique powers that people who were born on other landmasses do not have. That's been pounded into our psyches ever since we've been going to school. And when you learn the actual history of this country, and when you get really brave and you start to learn the history of the rest of the world, you realize that America was created by human beings just like every other country in the world. Deeply flawed. There are going to be times when this journey is going to be very difficult. Some of you are going to disagree with me vehemently. I would just like you to keep in mind that as much as I try to convey to you history and not my opinion so much, because I have a hard time doing that. I'm biased just like every other person. I have my pet perspectives that I have to check all the time. And in these discussions, I have to be very careful that I am not expressing my opinion to you, but that I'm telling you the history and leaving it to you to interpret. That's going to be a heavy lift for me. I'm being honest here. But in those times that you disagree with me, I would like for you to keep in mind that you're not really disagreeing with me. Unless you're disagreeing with my opinion, you're not disagreeing with me. You're disagreeing with the history. And just remember, the history, regardless of who tells it, is what it is. So, we've got a heavy lift before us, ladies and gentlemen. And because one issue was so front and center for the past few months, and it got so much attention on social media, I figured I would start with that. I figured I would start with focusing on our indigenous brothers and sisters and the history of brutality and violence against our native brothers and sisters in this country. Why? Because I was very interested to see how many people were shocked and appalled at the violence that was perpetrated against the protesters, the water protectors, whatever you would like to call them, at Standing Rock, at our native brothers and sisters at Standing Rock these past few months. And I was shocked and appalled at people being shocked and appalled because I didn't realize people didn't know the history this country has of brutalizing Native American people. What we've been taught in schools is not the history of our Native brothers and sisters, the indigenous Americans in this country. And beginning next week, I am going to try my best to explain to you why, beginning all the way back in the 1800s with the doctrine of discovery and Christopher Columbus. So, I really thank you very much for tuning in. Tonight's a short night, no homework. I just wanted to come in, say hi, Get you used to seeing my face. Get you used to hearing my voice, because we are going to have a great time unpacking all of this really, really fascinating history. Above all else, it's fascinating. Above all else, whatever else you will come to think of the history of this country that we discover together, above all else, it is fascinating. It's amazing that we're still here. So, starting next Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, we are going to begin to take down that wall of misinformation and untruth that we've all been taught brick by brick. And we are going to do our best to build a foundation of truth and honesty that we can all build a much better future on. So thanks so much for joining us. And remember, tune in again next week, Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Like our Facebook page, Brick by Brick on Facebook. Subscribe to this page. Share this video. And again, join us next week. Thank you so much for joining.
Building it brick by brick.